Hello there, and welcome back to our Orlando time-lapse series. Today is a special episode. It's the Christmas special. Later it makes much more sense when we adding some Christmas decoration also on the main hub. But first of all, we have to get there. And so the first part of this video is constructing this main hub. As you're watching this episode right now, I will be on a vacation over the coming days, and where I meet up with my own family and we celebrate Christmas. I mean, here in Germany it's maybe a slight bit different than in the United States. I mean, even here in Germany people aren't really sure when to celebrate it really. My family and myself, we always celebrate on the 24th, and there's also the day where you get your presents and so on, and where we have a dinner. And on the 25th there is normally just a rest day and not so much happening. But I'm certain that other people are celebrating it in a much more different way, and I feel it's just very wonderful that there are different ways how to celebrate this wonderful occurrence each year. I know some of my friends that they are going to the church on this day, and where they have some traditions in place that are the same one each year. So I don't have this really. I'm not that religious. When I go to a church, I usually go there for the musicality, because you have this epicness of the organ there, and that's just the main reason why I would go there. And of course, my fascination of the architecture. But especially over those winter days, I would call them, there's a special atmosphere that comes along with them that I really enjoy. It's this mix about memories from my childhood, but also this coziness and this warmth, where you at least from some days over the year come together with your family and your loved ones, and you meet up on this occasion to celebrate Christmas. So I have a tradition, or well, maybe not a tradition, but something that I really like to do, and that is on those winter days to go out at night and to stroll through those old streets. Here in Germany we still have many old buildings. With that I mean those Fachwerkhäuser, timbered framed houses. There's just this cozy quality I enjoy very much. And you see those beautiful lit houses, and also those smells of burnt wood and coldness, especially if it snows. And yeah, it's just something I very much enjoy during those winter days. I mean, here in Germany, it's of course not only this occurrence, but where you also have this commercialization of it. You have all those Christmas markets here, and where people sell you from Glühwein over gebrannte Mandeln and Lebkuchen. And all over the world you have this happening. And especially in the United States, I think you have this commercialization effect. I mean, you see it on big brands like Coca-Cola or McDonald's, and even in Disneyland. The complete park, and especially the main street of it, adapts during this Christmas phase and during those winter days. And I feel like the park transpires also a certain atmosphere in those days. So maybe let me explain a little bit more what you see right now in our build. So I'm constructing, as you see, this main hub, and start to lay out those areas where you have later those flower beds. And so the question was how to create them pretty accurately so that they look like in the real park, and where they have this roundish and organic appearance. And it was quite a struggle to get this layout perfectly there without any reference image in the game. And I decided to use the same stones as on the boardwalk as a foundation for the fence later on. And the great part about this stone is on those areas where you have very tight and sharp corners, you just rotate that stone and use the short side on it to make those sharp corners. And this is super helpful to have something there, some element in the game where you can do some things like that. Because it's not only here, we can use the same method also on the central hub later on, where you also have a little bit those flower baths and those zones around this giant hub later on. In the prequel, I used the small wooden bracket for the boardwalk there. I mean, retrospectively, I would use a very different piece in that, but at the time of 2017, there were still many pieces missing, and so the small wooden bracket was there the best choice. As you may know, the bracket is of course not symmetrical by itself, like those stones we are using right now. And the big advantage that we have now is when you mirror that over, you can just mirror it and it will look exactly the same on the other side. But back then, this was the problem because I had to turn each item by itself. Later on in this footage you see also some pieces on the fence where they are not symmetrical by itself and where I go in and turn each piece by itself. I mean, you could at the end say, yeah, then just use those pillars and use the symmetry mode on them, but still I just don't want to do that, okay? I don't have this trust right now of this feature. The best thing would of course to have an absolute rotation mode, so when you have multiple items selected that they rotate about their absolute position, and this would speed up this whole process tremendously. In the end, it doesn't really matter that much since I'm used to it exactly like that for the last 8 years. And since this process is rather slow, I feel that it is maybe even better in the end for making those sharp corners in the right proportion and in the right form. Yeah, that's maybe another thing, that fastness is not always better. I mean, it's of course very convenient if something works out pretty fast and to have a quick result there. But I feel like on most things, if you invest a little bit more time and effort into it, it will look so tremendously better in the end. I mean, as you know, I'm coming from a musician perspective, and it's pretty obvious that you don't learn a piece in one day. Of course, you can play it in one day, but to what quality? And to really master something, and you have to give it enough dedication and effort. And it's the same thing with everything there is. May it be in art, may it be here in our video game, may it be in architecture, may it be in music, may it be in cooking maybe even. You have to give it enough love in the end. And eventually, at some point, this will pay back and you will receive the love in whatever it is for yourself. But there's also a different thing here I'm encountering pretty much since I started to do recreations. And that's just the thing that we always have to recreate something, right? Most of the time. We don't invent something completely new. And if you do something completely new, then this speeds up the progress, I think. Because all the time we have to recreate something, we have to look for those reference images and to make sure that it looks very similar to whatever we want to recreate, right? And this is just a natural limitation or thing that we have to encounter. On one part, I'm a little bit jealous about all other people who just do a park out of their imagination, and therefore they are already much quicker in constructing this park and much more far in the progress of creating that, where we still are stuck to the main entrance and to the main hub. But I think it's just something that we have to live with. And sometimes you may wonder why I use we all the time. I mean, sometimes I do not even care about it so much, really. I just try to explain things. And sometimes I use also this infamous you know all the time. which I tried to reduce in the last 2 episodes. And it's maybe just the fact that I'm not a native speaker. I mean, there's just this barrier, this speech barrier, that lets me, of course, not in and to speak now fluently with you English. It's just because I'm a German, and therefore, at least for a German, I think it's okay. But yeah, I just want to say I use we all the time also for a purpose sometimes, because it's our journey, right? We are in this together. You are, of course, not building with me, but you always can comment and interact with me. And in that way, the park itself gets influenced in some way, maybe not directly, but indirectly. And I just think there are only benefits of that, because I question myself then, especially on the language part. Without you, I wouldn't question that, and I would just continue on that. Sometimes when you are alone, and imagine I would create something like this only in my lonely chamber where nobody would know about this, then I have a very monotheistic view of that whole thing, right? And therefore I think when we approach this as a community project, we only have benefits at the end, and where we see the park in different lights and with different eyes. And this boosts also not only the motivation, but also the thought process about it. So in short, it improves the overall result in the end. So let's come back to the build a little bit. So as we now layouted those flower beds or planting beds, I decided to use this plastered wall as a floor and to use the normal scaling of that, because I think it's not so repetitive than when you scale it down even. And I just plastered everything there. And the idea here is that those planters, they of course get a soil material, and on top of that we place the flowers. So this step right now, I mean, it's a little bit optional, I would say, because those flowers that I later discovered, they include a soil bed with them. So in the end we could remove that then again. But I think if we at some point decide, okay, we do something else now, a different flower, or maybe they add different kind of flowers and later updates, then we can just rely on this generic floor there. In the prequel I would always use the hedge just for that, because I found this to work the best there, because those soil elements there, you couldn't even scale them down then. I mean, it was just this limitation, right? And here you see just how easy and fast you can do that. My 7-year younger me would completely cry now when he would see this. And not only he, I mean literally myself, 4 or 5 months from now, I would not believe this. And at the time when they announced the sequel, I was in complete shock, because I thought there would be never a sequel of that game. Because Frontier was on Planet Zoo, and after that on those Jurassic World titles, and they made 2 of that. So I thought, okay, they completely changed now to this dinosaur company maybe, and where they run on parallel this Elite Dangerous sci-fi game. In retrospect, I have to say that I judge myself as a little bit naive. It was maybe the most natural decision to make a sequel out of that. But still, I think if they, at that moment, would have sit down and they would think about, okay, what game could we create next, and where it's not to be seen like as a sequel. And also to skip this tiring process of keeping already existing titles alive and to fill them up with content that you have to create for free basically, then I think you come to the conclusion at the end that it's best to make a game that inhibits all those great things out of those 3 games, and to make one framework where you can fill up this whole thing endlessly and only have to care about this one thing. and where you can take everything you did in before and use it now as an advantage. I truly think you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. You just have to make some new improvements and to refine this whole experience. And I also don't think that you really need water parks at this point. I mean, I know there are many people that wanted one, but they didn't want this experience now, right? They wanted a polished, finished game that you can play and have fun with it. And that's why I think it would work so much better if you do it as a framework. First, have a solid and base foundation before you experiment with some crazy water park expansions. If you have the framework, then you can of course work on those expansions. And still I don't know why they did it in that way, because Roller Coaster Tycoon 3, you had first the base game and then the expansions, and they had worked. And you also wouldn't have this narrative when you advertise a DLC. People would say, okay, why do I need this DLC? Is it really worth to get it for this game type? If the game would have all those three things in it, and it would be seen as the space game, oh boy, I want everything there is. You kinda get this completeness factor into it, that you don't want to miss anything, because you have this great framework where you can already see that those later expansions will fit into it. And where it's not like now, okay, they create a sequel after a sequel after a sequel, and in those own sequels I need to buy 10 DLCs, and after 5 years the game is offline, and then the same thing is happening a second time. And my fear is, I mean, they made another DLC for Planet Zoo, but I don't think this will go into infinity. At some point they will cancel that game or close support on it. And that's the same thing I feared for Planet Coaster. I mean, there it happened already 3 years from today. And at some point they had this terrible idea also to introduce a seasonal pass. I mean, for the DLCs, this is still the April's Fool, right? Until this day. And already at that point something went wrong. And our alarm bells should have ringed at this point already. Because this is not a natural thing you do as a company that wants to create a game, right? To just say, okay, you pay $20 in the month, but if you don't pay anymore, then you can't have access to your content anymore. I mean, this is just a completely nonsensical idea about those games in general. Why would you do that? This maybe makes sense if you have now an action game or some ego shooter out there, where you don't necessarily have a constant progress on something you work. I mean, this reminds me a little bit on the subscription of Adobe programs. I mean, I don't like this system there either, but at least you get so many programs that would be otherwise impossible to afford. I mean, we can go deeper on that. I mean, in the whole game industry and also in the movie industry, you have this trend right now where you make everything as a subscription-based service. And on some parts I can understand that, of course, and where it makes also sense, maybe on streaming services, but on games I don't think so. I think the concept of paying for something one time and to then get something you like, I still believe that that is a good concept. I can remember from my childhood when I went to a game store and to see all those games on the shelves and to look on them and to read the description on the backside of it. And to have actually something there in your hands, a physical copy, that's something what I miss today a little bit. You had another relationship to a game. It's very weird for me to describe that, but I mean, today you can of course also buy such things, but in those old days where this was the only way to play a game, to actually go out and buy that in a physical way, it had something special. At least for me today, it is way too convenient to just download it on Steam. It's just buy it, download it and play it. And if it's a full price and you get something that's worth to have, then this is absolutely fine. But if it pretends to be finished and where it's pretty obvious that core functionality is still missing, then this is of course a problem. And maybe that's the source of where this mentality comes from, that in the old days when you published a game, it was out in the world and you could barely make any update to that, or basically the consumer would have to care that the game itself gets an update. So the game had to be so convincing in their quality at release that there were no excuse to leave it half done, because it would just not sell. But today, if you decide to make an update, you can just press a button and then every person that bought this game on Steam gets an automatic update. So maybe this is the reason why we see something like that so often in the present. And too many companies rely on this excuse, oh, we fix it later, we can just update the game. But there are many examples where at first the game was a flop and where it was an incomplete mess, and after the developer really took it seriously, it turned into a giant success. A couple of them come to my mind: Cyberpunk 2077, No Man's Sky and Fallout 76. They prove that it can be done, and I hope the next one will be Planet Coaster 2. At this point, let's get back to our build. So as you can see, we placed the fence around the planter, and I really like this visual look, how the fence performs this curvatures of this organic shape. But yeah, I made also this niche, and in this niche there's a little electrical box, I think. At least I'm not too sure what it is, but I think it's quite nice to have a detail here that interrupts this symmetricalness. Also, when you take a look from above of the main hub, you will see that the street around the hub itself is not perfectly symmetrical. On the right side, the boardwalk has a different degree angle than on the left side. On the left side you have 45 degree, on the right side you only have 35 degree. I'm not too sure why that is, but it certainly has to be done because we want to stay pretty accurate here. But that's just something that I like, that from far away everything has this symmetrical appearance, and if you zoom in, there are a lot of things that vary a lot. And it's the same principle like in a previous episode where I talked about U.S.A. and this absolutism of symmetricalness that gets here loosened up. So when I see this, I used mostly for the construction of it art pieces and wooden elements. And this brings me to another topic, and that was from people under my videos that asked if I could elaborate on my piece selection, what pieces I use in the game most often. And the pieces that I used most often are of course those that you are seeing right now on the screen. It's those metal pieces. I mean, there are also variations of them that fit well together and that you can equally scale down as well. And then we have of course the art pieces in general that are just very usable. But also those wooden elements, I think they are greatly flexible if you want to construct now something like a main street. And alone with those few pieces, you can build pretty much anything there is already. And there will be later on the majority of pieces that we are using throughout the park. I mean, I thought a little bit on this topic, and it's of course the question how experienced you are in this game and how creative you are in the end of using those pieces for anything that you want to create, right? So in general, basic and generic pieces are the best parts that you have as an advanced builder. However, I also thought about the perspective of a new player or players that don't play this game as a pure building sim to enjoy also the management part of it. There I can of course understand that they don't want to invest thousands of hours into building and just to plop down some generic pieces, and therefore they are more bound or limited by the pre-designed themed pieces that we are given by the devs. And so as a new player, you are kinda limited by that, in what themed areas you will create later on. I mean, you can always say this argument of, okay, you can build pretty much anything out of those 1,000 pieces that we have and build your pirate theme and your sci-fi theme and also your western theme. But I can only agree to 50% to this argument. Although there is some truth in it, I feel like it's a poor excuse for missing content. Because in the prequel we had all of those very important themes. And therefore I think there is a scale of importance on certain themes. A western theme or a sci-fi theme, they are much more integrated in our pop culture and also in the history of cinema and games throughout the last years. And also the fact that you see those basic themes in all theme parks throughout the world should tell you that they are much more relevant and important, that they should be there. And that they can, of course, can be replaced with a Viking theme or a mythology theme. And so I think it's a poor excuse because it bottlenecks all the people, and especially new players, that have to think around the box now how to create something that they want. And especially because it's called Planet Coaster, I would assume it's again a theme park simulation and not just a pure water park simulation. I mean, then call it Planet Aqua or something like that. It has the sense of being a theme park sim, and therefore I would assume that the most generic themes are in it to create the most important themes throughout all theme parks. It just don't make sense to exclude them, and I'm so sorry that I repeat myself over and over, but I still can get why don't you copy over all those vanilla pieces from the prequel and just copy them into the sequel? I don't get it. Just do it. It's the same engine. And that's also the same thing that gets me a little bit raging inside. Why in the heck do we have a different weather system in this game? I mean, just imagine, we had in Planet Zoo a perfect weather system where we also had snow, and the snow would fall on every object there is in the game. And oh gosh, I mean, why invest the time and effort into creating a second weather system that is far different from the one that we had in Planet Zoo that worked so golden? Okay, I have to calm down. Everything's fine, all good. But you kinda get it, okay? I'm so invested into this game and I want truly that it succeeds at the highest quality. And I also don't like to talk too much about that. But I kinda have the duty here to address that in the name of all players in the game. It has to be said, especially for new players. This is a giant issue, I think, that they keep away from this game, that they just can't recreate some of the most generic and important themes that there are throughout the ages. And I mean, it's pretty certain that they will include it at some point, but guess what? It will be a DLC then. And they have to pay $20 or $30 for it. Is that really the right strategy here? I can't really answer that. It's of course great if you would have them back, but I feel they are so important that they can't be sold as an optional DLC. So maybe a free update then. But again, they have to make money. But to end this topic, I can just hope that they will make the right decisions in the future and that we have at some point all those themes back that we loved in the prequel. One last update to the things that I said earlier. They were pre-recorded before they streamed this Frontier Unwrapped stream, and I was very delighted to see that they made an actual excuse and said sorry for their DLC idea, and that they in the next year will focus mostly on free updates. And that's of course a great thing to hear, and it makes me very happy to hear that. And especially the part where they showed this collision thing of the flume basically intercolliding with the track itself, and where they have this new technology where this flume adjusts itself to the curvature of the track itself. I found that very good that they gone a little bit in detail here and explained what they actually facing. And that's exactly what I want to see, right? I want to see the problems that they have and where they have to fight against them, and to see the process firsthand, what they have to face. And then I can excuse them because they have this issue that they are working on and so hard on it. And that's exactly like it should be, right? That transparency that's missing, or at least until now, gets back. And therefore, a big thank you to Frontier that you guys are going into the right direction here. Thank you. So at the end, it's a little Christmas gift. It's maybe not a big one, but a very important one, that's for sure. The things that I said in before and also in my other videos, they still remain. And I truly hope that they will continue on developing this game, and that we have at some point this true, extraordinary theme park experience in this game. But let's get back to our build. So as you see, the main hub is nearly finished, the flower beds are set, I constructed the lamps and also the flagpole. And you also noticed that I laid this track now around this hub. And I have to say that I find it quite charming how this toy train runs along that, even to that extent that I would leave it like that. But again, later on we have to do the tram there. I just think for this kind of occurrence of the Christmas episode and also the Christmas tree that we blazing right now down, it kind of fits into this whole situation that we have this little toy train there. So the actual Christmas tree is pretty big in reality, and it's even bigger than the railroad station. And therefore I looked up for some trees that I could use in the game, and the only tree that really looked like I could use it was this pine tree. And the idea here is that those Christmas gifts that are underneath this tree, they're hiding the foundation of it. I don't know if there is an actual stump of the tree that has to be hidden, or if it's just because you don't want that the tree is falling over and therefore you just have to fix it at the bottom of it. I noticed also that on the side of the tree you have cables there that are connected to the facades of the Main Street buildings. But I mean, it makes sense, right? That you have to take safety measures into account to hold this tree so that it doesn't hit people when it's maybe a little bit windy on those winter days. So while I'm constructing those gifts, I thought about keeping it interchangeable. So when there is another season coming, this place changes, of course, and therefore we have to make sure that everything is on a separate scenery group, that we can just pull this on and off whenever we like. In the end, we will not only have those few gifts here, the whole street will have that, and many different decorations, of course. And therefore I think when Christmas is over, we just pull everything under the ground and it stays there until the next year. Or it makes much more sense to make a blueprint and then just use that. So now for the decoration on the tree itself, I thought of using those light bulbs and I mean, makes very much sense to use them. And it's always just pull them towards the center on places where it looks like they could interweave with this tree. And it's also like in reality where you have to kind of be aware that you don't place too many of them on one spot, and so that you have at the end a balanced mix between empty space and places where you have those lights. On top of the tree, I also wanted a special star that is illuminated, and I found actually this very nice lamp type where you have this flower lamp. But yeah, the overall appearance at the end when you go to night mode and see this tree illuminated, I think it works great with those bulb lights. And since they are even recolorable, you can make them a little bit red and yellowish, and overall I think it gives a great picture to this Christmas occurrence. With these impressions, I would like to conclude not only today's episode, but the entire progress of our wonderful journey throughout this year. From July, with the continuation of Anaheim and the park's release in November, after the release of Planet Coaster 2, and even up to this December with the start of Orlando, this year will remain in my memory forever. It feels so good to be back, and it is a privilege to be able to pick up where I left off in 2019, be it in Anaheim or Orlando, but especially to be able to present my work in these videos and to receive so much amazing and grateful support from you guys fills me with deep appreciation and joy. So I just wanted to say thank you one more time. Merry Christmas to you all. May you have some wonderful days with your loved ones. See you in the next year. Bye.